Great, thank you. Okay, so welcome to everyone. I want to express my thanks to a colleague and a friend of mine, Rabbi Rob Scheinberg. He's a rabbi in Hoboken, and he introduced me to the last poem that we're going to be studying, and it was his idea that this would be appropriate for Tisha B'Av, so I'm very grateful to him for the gift of the poem and the idea of doing this session that we're going to have tonight. The laws of Tisha B'Av are that Tisha B'Av is considered a day of deep sorrow, and one of the features of observing the day that's not quite as well known as the other ones, that it's a day of mourning and fasting and so on, is Ein Shilat Shalom b'Tisha B'Av. There is no greeting one another on Tisha B'Av. The Hebrew term is asking how you're doing. Shilat Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, how are you? And may I wish you well-being. And as some of the commentators says, She'ein Zeh Yom Shalom. This is not a day of peace. This is not a day of well-being. So the Shulchan Aruch explains that, or states that this is not a day that we say hello to each other. If somebody does say hello to you, you're not supposed to be impolite. You answer softly and return the greeting, but it's not meant to be a day of embracing each person and hi, patting everybody on the back, even in the good old days when we could do such a thing. It's meant to be a day of, to use a term from today, social distancing. It's a day of each person coping with their struggles and their painful feelings, both individually and then, of course, collectively. There's a joke that I've told it's not Tisha B'Av yet, and I do greet everybody. There's a joke that I tell occasionally. I like this joke very, very much. And recently I've told it any number of times when people have asked me how I'm doing. So the joke goes like this, pretty much, the way I tell it. So Sam and Max haven't seen each other in ages, right? This is joke number 88. And they haven't seen each other in ages. They bump into each other. So Sam says to Max, "Hey, Max, it's been a long time. So what do you think of those Mets?" And Max looks at Sam and goes, "Sam, you haven't seen me in ages. And that's what you say? You don't ask how I am?" So Sam goes, "Okay, I'm sorry, Max, I apologize. Max, how are you?" Max, "Don't ask." That's the joke. So you can unmute yourselves if you are laughing uncontrollably. That's okay. I hope that if you can remember that joke, you'll see that it's actually relevant for this evening. So I chose 3 poems for us to look at tonight, and they span quite a period of time. The first poem is from Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda Halevi was an amazing persona in Jewish history. He was considered in many ways the greatest Hebrew poet after the Bible was closed. He lived from approximately, we're not sure exactly when he was born, something like 1075, but maybe a little bit later than that. And he died mysteriously, we're not quite sure when and how, in approximately 1140. So he was a consummate poet, as I say, considered the greatest Hebrew poet of our tradition until modern times. He was a very, very powerful thinker. He was a Torah scholar and a Talmudist and so on. He wrote the book called The Kuzari, which is a classic in Jewish thought. and an interesting and challenging book in some of its ideas. We're not going to go into all of it, although they would be relevant in a longer session. So he was in many ways a kind of a Renaissance man. He wrote secular poetry, he wrote prayers, he wrote, in years past, we have availed ourselves of some of his work on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. One of his beautiful poems, a very short poem, is a poem that says, God, I've been searching for you, and then after a while I keep searching and I see that actually you're coming straight to me. You're actually coming all the time to be with me. So there are contributions that he's made to our tradition. He wrote, as I say, secular poetry, which is goes all over the place and availed itself, was very influenced by Arabic poetry. This is part of what's called the golden age of Jewish and Muslim and Christian convivencias, I think, living together, sharing each other's cultures, learning from each other. Arabic poetry was the catalyst for the rejuvenation of Hebrew poetry, and Yehuda Halevi benefited from that quite a bit. He was a great lover of Zion, and he wrote many, many poems that were love poems, not to his beloved or not to a beloved, but to the land of Israel itself. And unlike many other people who wrote poetry like that, he actually then walked the walk, literally. He left Spain, where he was based. He was a prominent figure there. He was respected and revered, in fact. And he decided that he had to make aliyah, that he had to go live in Israel, because that was, his heart's desire. It's not clear whether he ever made it. The last time we hear about him, he's in Egypt. And then he disappears. That's one way that we don't know exactly when he died. The legend is that when he first came to the land of Israel, he comes there. The poem that we're about to read a little piece of is something that he is reciting, and then he gets murdered right on the beach after landing. So that's a legend. That's a legend. We don't know whether it happened. So let's begin by looking at this poem. And I want to read it quickly in the Hebrew, because it is a Hebrew poem and it has a certain sound to it. And then we have the English translation that's not written out as a poetic translation, but as an accurate translation, a translation by Tet Carmi, who's the editor of a wonderful book, the Penguin Book of Hebrew Verse. And he himself was a distinguished Hebrew poet. So he really understood what poetry was about. So this is how it begins. Tzion, halo tish'ali lishlom asirayich, dorshei shlomech, vehem yeter adarayich. Miyam umizrach umitzafon v'teiman, shlom rachok v'karov, si'i mikol avarayich. Shlom asir ta'ava, noten dma'av kital chermon, v'nichsaf l'riditam al hararayich. Livkot enutech ani tanim, ve'et echelom, Shivat Shvutech, Ani Kinor Shirayich. So this is the first few lines. This is about 1/10 of the entire poem. This is the famous beginning. Can somebody unmute themselves and volunteer to read the English translation for us, please? Nice and clear. Somebody? Going once.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
O Zion, will you not ask how your captives are, the exiles who seek your welfare, who are the remnant of your flocks? From west and east, north and south, from every side, accept the greetings of those near and far, and the blessings of this captive of desire, who sheds his tears like the dew of Hermon, and longs to have them fall upon your hills. I am like a jackal when I weep for your affliction, but when I dream of your exile's return, I am a lute for your songs.
Okay. So this is in Hebrew, a poem that's chock full of phrases and allusions to biblical verses from Psalms and from Isaiah. A whole bunch of different echoes are here when you know the Hebrew. And it begins by addressing Zion, right? Zion. And Zion is feminine, and she's personified, and he's asking, won't you ask how we're doing, right? This is what's called She'ilat Shalom, right? What's actually forbidden on Tisha B'Av. Won't you ask how your Asirayich, your captives, your prisoners, who are the prisoners? Who are the prisoners? Somebody can chime in if you want. They're us, right? They're all of the exiles. They're all of the people of Israel who are dispersed throughout the world and who cannot live in Zion. Let's remember that this is during the time of the Crusades, and the Jewish people have actually been kicked out of Israel by the Christian crusaders. Later on, they'll be kicked out again when the Muslim groups get power again. So we are captive to the world powers such as they were at the time, the two civilizations, the Christian and Muslim civilization, and we are the exiles. And he pleads before Zion, don't you care about us? Can't you do something? Do you really want to know how we are? And then he says, we, right, from west, east, north, and south, from every side, accept the greetings of those near and far. This is also, again, a verse from Tanakh, from Isaiah. These are all of your children, right? All of your captives. We are constantly praying for Jerusalem. We are constantly yearning for Jerusalem. And we constantly wish you well. So we are doing this. What about you? What about you, Zion? And then there's a little turn in the way that Yehuda Levi uses the idea of being a captive. Right? What does he do with this notion of being a captive in the middle of the stanza there?
Well, he redefines what it means to be a captive, talking about a captive of desire. So here, if we're talking about exiles, captives might seem like, people captured from war and such, but here it's an internal, it's a captive of an internal feeling.
Right. So this is love poetry. This is the super romantic, the romancero kind of motif, where the lover writes poetry to the beloved and says, I'm useless without you. I can't do anything without you. I'm a captive of my love to you. There's, I am yours. So this is Yehuda Halevi using that kind of image and saying, forget about the physical captivity, forget about people being in exile. I am enthralled to you. I love you so much. And please now accept my own feelings of and tears and so on, right? The blessings of this captive of desire, or the word shalom is actually used again. Shalom asir tava, right? The well-being and the shalom of the one who is captive by the yearning and the desire, the passion. The word tava could be passion, right? I have a passion for you. And now shalom is not my well-being, but my saying, hello, hi, I'm here. Take notice of me. When we get to the last couple of lines, he says, I am ready to weep for you, and hopefully one day, what? What's the flip side? Right? Ani kinor
I will sing your songs.
Right?
I will be
I will be, here it's translated lute, a harp. I will be the musical instrument that will sing, that will express your songs. When you are finally able to sing again, I want to sing those songs. Or I want to sing the songs of love for you, even if I can't see you, even if I don't hear you reciprocate that love. Again, a very medieval trope of the lover yearning for the beloved, and the beloved is locked up someplace, or the beloved is inaccessible. And Yudah Levi is that hopelessly passionate lover who's ready to do anything. To cry, I'll cry. To sing, I'll sing. I will be the harp for your songs. Right before that, he says, placing my tears like the dew of Hermon, hoping that they will flow on the mountains, on your mountains. This is also an echo of Psalms. This is the Psalm where we say, Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. So it's so good for friends and beloveds to be together. It's like the oil that flows over from the head of the high priest Aaron, and it's like Tal Hermon. It's like the dew of Hermon that flows onto the mountains of Zion, right? So the blessing that is bestowed on Zion. So here he's using that image, but flipping it into a painful image of crying. So the next poem that we're going to look at, and these poems hopefully will build one on the other. The next poem that we're going to look at, we fast forward approximately 900 years, 850 years, and that's the next page. And this poem is from 1967. It was written originally in May of 1967 by Naomi Shemer in Israel. It was commissioned for the celebration of Israel for that year. And if we think about our history, May 1967 is just a few weeks before June 1967. And June 1967 was the Six-Day War. And June 1967 was when Jerusalem was recaptured after 19 years of being in the hands of Jordan. So this poem and this, classic Israeli song, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, right, it was written first before Jerusalem was retaken by Israel, and then it was modified. New stanzas were written to recognize the change in Jerusalem. So here's the poem itself. Many of us have heard it sung, have sung it on our own, have joined together with other people to sing it. So we can sort of sing it a little bit mutely. How's that? Right? Avir harim tzalul kayayin v'reach oranim Isa v'ruach ha'arbayim imekol pa'amonim ובתרדמת אילן ואבן, שבויה בחלומה, העיר אשר בדד יושבת, ובליבה חומה. ירושלים של זהב, ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. And then it goes on with the other stanzas. We have them right in front of us And you have a note there at the bottom half of the right-hand side of the page, verses added after 1967. Just before we get to that, anybody see a connection between this poem and the Yehuda Halevi poem? I hope. Somebody raising their hand? It's allowed. Yes. Okay, Jennifer. Unmute yourself. Stuart, unmute her.
Ani hakinor.
Right. So, Halo lechol shiraich ani kinor. For all of your songs, I am, how does it get translated here? A lute, a violin. Here it's a violin. Jerusalem of gold and bronze and of light. Behold, I am a violin for all your songs. Because in modern Hebrew, a kinor is the word that they use for a violin. That phrase comes straight out of the poem we just read, right? Look at the previous page, right? The previous page has it as Ani kinor l'shirayich, right? And here, Halo lechol shirayich, Ani kinor. So in a certain sense, this is meant to be a fulfillment of that yearning of Yehuda Halevi, because here we are, at least Naomi Shemer, right? She's in the land of Israel. She's able to sing Zion's song. Zion and Jerusalem are interchangeable words, names. There's another phrase here that we need to look at for tonight for sure. Ha'ir asher badad yoshevet. Right? That comes straight out of the very first verse of Eicha, of Lamentations. Eicha yashva badad, ha'ir batiyam. How could this so populous city sit alone and be bereft like a widow? That's of course Jerusalem. So Ha'ir Asher Badad Yoshevet is coming straight out of the mourning traditions, the traditions of Tisha B'Av, and this is a song that was originally written with the idea that Jerusalem was in where the heart of Jerusalem, Uviliba Choma, where the heart of Jerusalem resided, was inaccessible to the Jewish people. They were barred from going there, right? When we get to the last stanzas on that right-hand side, Chazarnu el borot hamayim. We have returned to the cisterns, to the market, to the marketplace. A ram's horn calls out on the Temple Mount in the Old City. So this is this triumphant celebration of the fact that the shofar was blown right there as the war ended, and we retook the Old City. We came right onto the Temple Mount. We came back to the wall itself. So we have returned. When what we don't have here is a number of verses that were written before 67 that these verses replace. So the way that the verses were originally written before the Six-Day War happened was, it goes like this. Eicha yavshu borot hamayim, kikar hashuk reika, ve'ein pokedet har habayit, ba'ir ha'atika. First word, eicha, right? Which is the word that we will begin and say again and again and again in our lamentations tonight, right? How could it be, oh my, that the cisterns of water have all dried up and the market square is empty, desolate, and no one goes up to visit the Temple Mount in the ancient city. How could this be, right? So the song was written to be a song with some sadness in it as well. Later on, the next verse, again, Uvama arot asher basela, which is the first line of this next stanza that was we have on the right-hand side. Mi alalot ruchot, the winds howl. Ve'ein yored el yam hamelach bederech Yericho, and nobody can go down to the Dead Sea by the Jericho road. And then the renewed version is that no, now there are suns, thousands of suns are shining, and we now can go down to the Dead Sea using the Jericho Road, because now we've taken the West Bank, we've taken possession of all of this. So there's an interesting history, a development to the way that this song was composed and how it was sung. We've forgotten about those other verses, but they were the original verses. We should know that not everybody was happy with this song. This song, captured the Jewish heart and the Jewish imagination of people everywhere. It's one of the last songs, in a certain sense, that actually became the common property of Jews in the diaspora as well as in Israel. Right? How many popular songs that are sung in Israel today the Jews in the diaspora know? Practically nothing. This became a universal Jewish anthem. There were people who advocated for this to take over as the Israeli national anthem instead of Hatikva. But other people were not so happy about it. Can anybody think of why it might not be the absolutely most wonderful song in the entire world? Is there anything here that could possibly upset anybody, could possibly rub people the wrong way? Who could not like this song? So, yes, Sarita?
Yeah, so anyone, if someone else coming at this from way in, but this is my homeland, and you're taking over my homeland, that they would not be happy with this declaration. Right.
So for sure, I'm not asking any, anybody that's not part of the Jewish love story to celebrate this Jerusalem or anything like that. So the fact that Arabs weren't happy that they lost the war is not surprising. So that's not the question. But what about within the Jewish community itself? Yeah, Alan.
What about the ultra observant?
So the ultra observant are clearly, we know that the ultra observant weren't big fans of Zionism in general, and the 6-Day War was a big problem for the ultra observant, because there was it shook up the status quo, and super conservative with a small c people learn to deal with the status quo, and then changes become very disturbing. But what I want to push is to say something that goes a little bit more sharply into an unexpected place. Amos Oz, one of the great Israeli writers of modern times, was furious about this song, because he, as a Zionist, as a secular Zionist, was furious about the original version of the song, where it says that Kikar Hashuk Reika, that the marketplace is desolate, is empty. He says, are you kidding? Go look at the marketplace in the old city of Jerusalem. It's humming with activity. Aren't those people people? How can you say that there's nobody there? So he challenged Naomi Shemer from what we would call a left-wing position, and said, you're erasing the existence of a bunch of people. You're not seeing them. This is a kind of question that we have heard again and again in this country with regard to minorities and so on, and not only minorities, even majorities. The whole feminist revolution was about the fact that, hello, we're standing right here, we're human beings, and they're not a minority. They're a tiny, whatever it's 51% of humanity. But the idea of marginalizing people and making people invisible is a common cultural problem. And Amos Oz in 1967 was complaining that we should never be guilty of such a thing. That we can celebrate. Amos Oz wasn't a self-hating Jew. Amos Oz wasn't an anti-Zionist like some, let's say, ultra-Orthodox people would be. Amos Oz wasn't willing to join the Arab cause and fight against Israel. Amos Oz was Amos Oz. He's one of the great Israelis and great Jews of our time. And what he said was, it doesn't require for me to be a lover of Zion not to see that there are other people there. His was for all of his importance, and of course, 1967 he wasn't the Amos Oz that he was decades later. Nevertheless, he was a public voice, a very minority voice. He did not stop people from loving Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. He didn't stop it from becoming a universal hit. Other people that were on his side, there was a very revered Israeli singer and entertainer and poet, Meir Ariel. He wrote an anti-Yerushalayim Shel Zahav song called Yerushalayim Shel Barzel, Jerusalem of Steel. But those voices were voices that were hushed up or ignored, and were voices that did not speak to the overall feelings of the Jewish people. For the last section of the evening session, let's now go to the third poem. So the third poem is on the next page. This is by Shva Salhuv. She was born in 1963. She is still with us, thankfully. She is an Israeli poet, novelist, critic, writer. And this is what I mentioned before, that I'm very, very grateful to Rabbi Rab Scheinberg for introducing me to her existence, let alone to her work. So, since then I've looked a little bit at what she's done, and somebody to look into. I don't know that anything actually is translated into English. I translated this poem into English for us for this evening. But her story is an interesting story. She was born in Israel to a family that came from Libya, Jewish family from Libya, and the standard kind of immigration story. The parents are first generation. They don't quite make it in the land that they emigrate to, the land of Israel. They have a very tough time. They're very traditional. She goes off and gets an education. She's smart. She's creative. She learns that the Ashkenazi world actually exists and actually has much more power than her own culture, which she was familiar with from being a child. And that, of course, creates all of the material that we can enjoy, but that causes her immense pain, and that then she then writes about. She's an important figure today. And I want to read her poem in Hebrew again to hear it, and then we'll see how it lines up with what we're dealing with tonight. Sion, Bereshit Michtavi Esh'al Lishlomech. איך את מרגישה? הכל בסדר? ומה שלום אסירייך? פלסטינאייך? יהודייך? תגידי, איך הילדים? ומה שלום מחריבייך, ציון? ציון, הלא תשאלי לשלומי? אני לא מרגישה כל כך טוב. יד ימין שלי מתייבשת, העצב דלוק. אל תשאלי. Will somebody do us the honor of reading that in English, please? Beryl, thanks.
Zion, at the beginning of my letter, I'll ask, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Everything okay? And how are your prisoners, your Palestinians, your Jews? Say, how are the kids? And how are your destroyers doing, Zion? Zion, won't you ask how I'm doing? I don't feel so good. My right hand is withering. The nerve is inflamed. Don't ask.
So I hope that you can remember the joke I started out with. So this poem is again, a poem that is full of allusions, full of echoes, full of, citations that people can recognize. Hopefully we see directly, this is, a poem that comes straight out of Yehuda Halevi, right? It comes straight out of that poem. Tzion, halo tishali lishlom asirayich, right? Tzion, right? Ani esh'al lishlomech, right? And then it goes into, instead of being high culture, I know Yehuda Halevi, I'm very well educated. It goes into Echad Margisha, Kol Beseder, right? This is street vernacular Hebrew. This is just like the simple kind of Hebrew that people exchange with one another without any pretense, right? But then it comes back, right? Uma shlom asirayich. And how are your captives doing? Which brings us back to the first lines of Yehuda Halevi. Halo tishali lishlom asirayich. So there, the captives, we took for granted, are the Jewish people. And Yehuda Halevi then says, the people living in exile who are suffering for you. Who are the captives here? Any suggestions? Well,
Yeah.
what are the next two words?
Your Palestinians, your Jews. So it just seems to be prisoners of a conflict. I'm thinking about how in the Yehuda Halevi poem, it was the captive went from, actual physical captivity and then to a feeling. Here, it's sort of somewhere in the middle where it's people who were maybe trapped into this conflict.
Okay, when we talk about the Jews in Yehuda Halevi's time, that he is portraying as being in exile, what are they experiencing? What are they? He calls them captives, right? So it's not simply diaspora Jews living in Al-Andalus, and making a great living. He's calling them captives. In what sense? What is he trying to convey? He's conveying suffering, right? He's conveying misfortune. He's conveying everything that's not right. Nobody wants to be a captive. The suffering there is clearly the suffering of his people. If we're talking about captives here, who are the sufferers? Literally, since Israel is a sovereign state, sovereignty is a big word these days that people are thinking about and arguing about. One of the powers of a sovereign state is to incarcerate people, who they feel are challenging the social order, committing crimes, presenting a danger to society. Right? So here we're, in a certain sense, talking just, again, plain no metaphors, no allegories, no highfalutin Hebrew. We're talking about prisoners. How are your prisoners doing? Israel, you have prisoners. You have jails where you imprison people. How are they doing? So that question is a very painful question today in Israel. Can somebody volunteer, for instance, who is imprisoned in Israel today? Anybody want to offer a response? So criminals are in prison.
Murders.
What?
Murders.
Terrorists are in prison. Criminals, Jewish and non-Jewish. If you're a criminal, and they catch you and they can convict you, they'll put you in prison, or they'll put you in prison, until they convict you. Terrorists are if we're lucky enough to capture them, they get put in prison. Who else gets put in prison?
Immigrants.
Immigrants get put in prison, right? People who are running away from slaughter or from famine, from all kinds of terrible, unlivable conditions, but Israel puts them then into detention camps. So there are all kinds of populations of prisoners. I hate to say it, but just like in this country, many of the people in prison don't deserve to be in prison. So we're not going to go through a whole thing tonight. We're almost finished with our discussion this evening. But the questions that are being asked in this kind of like offhand way are very hard, painful questions. They are questions that are not sugar-coated. They're not questions that are going to become the material for a new national anthem of the Jewish people. How are your destroyers doing? Machrivayich. That phrase also comes straight out of Tanakh, where God says, Isaiah quotes, God saying, your destroyers will come out of you. Forget about all your enemies that are outside you. Right? They're going to come straight out of you. So these are very tough questions. And then she says, you know what? Maybe it's better that you don't ask how I'm doing. I'm not doing that great. I'm in pain. I'm in pain. So we are about to enter now into Tisha B'Av. And Tisha B'Av is a day of remembrance of Jewish suffering, and it should be. But we have a big question about what kind of Jewish suffering we should be sensitive to. Right? What causes us to suffer? Who is causing us to suffer? Who are our destroyers? To remember our tradition is a holy responsibility. I happen not to be a big fan of turning Tisha B'Av into a day of thinking about everybody else's suffering. We should think about everybody else's suffering the other days of the week and of the month and of the year. Tisha B'Av is about Jewish suffering for sure, Jewish pain, Jewish loss. But we have to think about what that memory is supposed to mean to us, what that memory is supposed to teach us. What is it supposed to do to us? Do we erase? Do we make invisible anyone or anything that we find painful? Or do we cope with our pain and challenge ourselves to understand whether there are ways to get out of the pain that we're experiencing? Thank you. We're going to conclude here. Nothing to be solved, but I hope a lot to think about and a lot to feel about. So We are now going into Ma'ariv, I think. And is Craig around?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So if people have the booklet that was uploaded for your use, we're going to begin with Ma'ariv. And
There's also a link in the chat if you want to find it.
Right, thank you, John, as always. So that's available for us. Ma'ariv will proceed in a kind of a hushed approach, and we don't have a minyan per se, so we're not going to do Baruch Hu. The custom is to dim the lights if you want. That's already, I see some people have done that, and to sit on a low stool or on the floor as a mourner would do. So that's where we're going to begin now. Craig, thank you.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'vorah ma'ariv aravim v'chachma p'tech sho'arim v'yichud v'sarem v'tinam. Leila v'leila mipnei choshech v'choshech mipnei or ma'ariv yom mevin leila mavdil ben yom uvein leila Adonai tzvot shemo el chai v'kayam tamid yamloch aleinu le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai ma'ariv aravim avat olam beit Yisrael amcha ahavta Torah mitzvot chukim mishpatim otanu l'marta al kein v'naleinu V'shemad b'divrei Toratecha v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed ki hem chayenu v'yorech yomenu v'hem negdei yomam v'layla v'ahavtecha al tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Ve'ohavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavecha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derech uv'shachbecha uv'kumecha u'kshartam liot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot bein einecha u'taftam al mezuzot beitecha uv'isharecha v'om shmo tishmo mitzvot asher anochi mitzavecha. Vayomer Moshe lemor daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem v'yasu lehem tzitzit al kafei ydehem l'doratam v'nanu al tzitzit hakanaf b'til chelet v'hayu lechem l'tzitzit v'yitem atom zchatem acharei levavachem v'acharei nechem asher atem zonim achareihem leman yitizkru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim le'elahechem ani Adonai Elahechem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lechem le'elahim ani Adonai Elahechem Adonai Elechem Emet. Emet v'emunah kol zot v'kayam aleinu ki hara. Oh, sagadol Elokein cheker ne'emunah. Umalchuto b'ratzon kiblu alehem Moshe uvenei Yisrael l'chanu shira b'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedor ba'kodesh nora tehilot osei fela Malchutcha ra'uvanecha boker yam lifnei Moshe ze elianu v'yamru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed v'nemar ki pada Adonai et Yaakov ugalo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai go'al Yisrael Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom. Ki el Shomrei Matzileno Ata, Ki el Melech Anu Rachum Ata, Ushmort Seitenu, Uvoenu Lechaim, Ul Shalom Ne'ata V'yad Olam, Baruch Atah Adonai, Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad, Baruch Atah Adonai Le'olam, Amen V'Amen, Baruch Adonai Yerushalayim, Hallelujah. Adonai Le'olam Yismach Ki Lo Yisrael. Ki el Adonai Lasso Dedchem Lo Adonai Hu Elohim, Adonai Hu Ha Elohim, V'Haya Adonai Melech Al Kol Haaretz Bayom Hahu Adonai Echad U'Shmo Echad. Kasher Yechalnu Lo Choshi. Kol Beim Asher Asita Yavo V'Yishtacha V'Levanecha Adonai V'Yivchaved L'Shimcha. Ki Gadol Adonai V'Yosei Nifla Orata Elohim Levadecha V'Emach Nevamcha V'Tzamri. L'Del Chali Olam L'Dor V'Dor Nesaper Tehilatecha. Baruch Adonai Bayom, Baruch Adonai Balayla, Baruch Adonai Asher B'Yado Nefesh Kol Chai V'Ruach Chomos Ish B'Yadecha Af Ki Ruchi. Yiru Einenu Yismach Libenu V'Tagil Nafshenu B'Yishut Not B'Emed Melech Adonai Malach Adonai Yimloch Le'Olam Va'ed Ki HaMalchut Shelcha Hiul Olmei Ad Timloch B'Chavod Ki Ein Lanu Melech Ela Ata Baruch Atah Adonai HaMelech B'Chvodo Tamid Yimloch Aleinu Le'Olam Va'ed V'Al Kol Ma'asav.
The book of Eicha begins on page 29 in the booklet that we have, the Book of Lamentations. It's available also, of course, at any full Tanakh, and you can find it in Safari or other places. Eicha, the Book of Lamentations, we have a number of people who are going to be reciting the chapters for us.
Chapter 1. Eicha yashva badam, ha'ir rabati am haita ke'almana, rabati bagoyim, sarati bamdinot haita lahamas, bachotiv ke'balayla, bedimata lechaya, in lamenachem mikol ohaveha, kol reyeha bagduba, hayula leoivim. Galta Yehuda me'oni u'merov avodah, hi yashva v'goyim, lo matza manoach, kol rodveha hisiguha ben hametzarim. Darchei Tzion avelo, mibli ba'e moed, kol she'areha shomemim, kohaneha ne'enachim, v'tuloteha nugot v'himarla. Hayu tzareha l'rosh oiveha shalu, ki Adonai hoga al rov pesha'eha. Olaleha halchu shvi lifnei tzahar, vayetze mibat Zion kol hadara, hayu sareha, ka'ayalim lo matzu mir'eh, vayelchu b'lo choach lifnei rodei. Zachra Yerushalayim, Yemei Anya Umrudeha, Kol Machamudeha, Asher Hayu Mimei Kedem, Binfol Ama Biatzar, V'ein Ozer La, Ra'u Hatzarim, Sachaku Al Mishbateha. Chet chot'a Yerushalayim, al kein l'nida haita. Kol mechabdeha hiziluha, ki ra'u ervata. Gam hina enacha, vatashar achor, vatashav achor. Tum'ata b'shuleha, lo zachra acharita. Tered plaim, ein menachem la. Re'ei Adonai et oni, ki higdil oye. Yado parash tsar, al kol machamadeha. Ki ra'ata goyim, Kirata goyim ba'u migdasha, asher tzivita, lo yavohu v'kahalach. Kol aman enachim mevakshim lechem, natnu machamadehem, be'ochel hashiv nafesh. Re'ei Adonai v'habita, ki hayiti zolela. Lo alechem, kol avdei derech, habitu oru. Im yesh machov kemachovi, asher olahali, asher hoga Adonai, b'yom charon apo. Mimarom, shalach esh ba'atzmotai, vayir Haras reshet liraglai heshivani achor, netanani shomema, kol hayom dava, nishkot al psha'ai v'yado, יסתרגו, עלו על צווארי, הכשיל כוחי, נתנני אדוני, בידי לא אוכל קום. סילה כל אבירי אדוני בקרבי, קרא עלי, מועד לשבור בחורי. גת דרך אדוני, לבתולת בת יהודה. על אלה אני בוכייה. איני יורדה המים, כי רחק ממני, מנחם משיב נפשי. היו בניי שוממים, כי גבר אויב. פרסת ציון בידיך, אין מנחם לה, ציווה אדוני, ליעקב סביב צריו. הייתה ירושלים לנידה ביניהם. צדיק הוא אדוני כפיהו מריתי, שמעונה כל העמים. וראו מכאובי, בתולותי ובחורי הלכו בשבי. קראתי למאהבי, המה רימוני, כהני וזקני בעיר גבהו. כי ביקשו אוכל לעמו, וישיבו את נפשם. ראה אדוני כי צר לי, מאיך מרמרו, נפח ליבי בקרבי, כי מרו מריתי. מחוץ שקלה החרב בבית כמוות. כי שמעו כי ננחה אני, אין מנחם לי כל אויבי. שמעו רעתי ששו, כי אתה עשית. הבאת יום קראת, ויהיו כמוני. תבוא חורתם לפניך, ויולל עמו, כאשר עוללת לי על כל פשעי. כי רבות הנחותי, בליבי דברי.
Chapter 2. Echa ya'iv be'apo Adonai et bat Zion, hishlich mishamayim eretz, tiferet Yisrael, v'lo zachar Adon raglav b'yom apo. Bila Adonai v'lo chamav, et konot Yaakov haras bevrato. מבצרי בת יהודה הגיע לארץ, חילל ממלכה ושריה, גדה בחוריה. כל גרן ישראל השיב אחור, ימינו מפני אויב. ויבער ביעקב כאש להבך לסביב. דרך קשתו כאויב, ניצב ימינו כצר ויהרוג כל מחמדי עין. באוהל בת ציון שפך כאש חמתו. היה אדוני כאויב בילה ישראל, בילה כל מנותיה שיחת מצרי. וירא בבת יהודה את הענייה והענייה. ויחמוס כגן סוכו שיחת מועדו. שיקח אדוני בציון מועד ושבת, וינת בזעם אפו מלך וכהן. זנח אדוני מזבחו נר מקדשו, הזכיר ביד אויב חומות ארמנותיה. כה נתנו בבית אדוני כיום מועד, חשב אדוני להשחית חומת בציון, נתקיו לא השיב ידו מבעליה, ויעגל חיל וחומה יחדיו ומעלו. טבעו בארץ שעריה, איבד ושיבר פריחיה, מלכה ושריה בגויים אין תורה, גם נביאיה לא מצאו חזון מאדוני. ישבו לארץ ידמו זקני בת ציון, העלו עפר על ראשם, חגרו סכין. הורידו לארץ ראשן, בתולות ירושלים. כלו בדמעות עיני, חמור מרמי, נשפך לארץ כבדי על שבר בת עמי. ועטף עולל ויונק ברחובות קריה. למותם יאמרו איה דגן ויין. והתעטפם כחלל ברחובות עיר. והשתפך נפשם אל חיק אמותם. מה ידך, מה המלך? הבא ירושלים, מה אשווה לך ואנחמך בתולת בת ציון. כי גדול קיים שברך מירפא לך. נביאייך חזו לך שב ותפל, ולא גילו על עוונך להשיב שבותך. ויחזו לך מעשות שווא ומדוכים. ספקו עלייך כפיים כל עוברי דרך, זרקו ויניעו ראשם על בת ירושלים. הזאת העיר שיאמרו כלילת יופי, משוש לכל הארץ. עטו עלייך פיהם כל אויבייך, סרקו ויחרקו שיין, אמרו בילנו. אך זה היום שקיווינו, מצאנו ראינו, עשה אדוני אשר זמם. פיצה אמרתו אשר ציווה מימי קדם, הרס ולא חמל. וישמח עלייך אויב, הרים קרן שרייך. צעק ליבם אל אדוני, חומת בת ציון. הורידי חנחל דמעה יומם ולילה. אל תתני פוגת לך, אל תדום בת עינך. קומי רוני ולילה. לראש השמורות שפכי חיים ליבך, נוכח פני אדוני. שאי אליו כפייך, על נפש וללייך. עטופים ברעה בראש כל חוצות. ראה אדוני והביטה, למי עוללת כה. אם תאכלנה נשים פריים, עוללי תפוחים. אם יהרג במקדש אדוני כהן ונביא. שכבו לארץ חוצות נער וזקן, בתולותיי ובחוריי נפלו וחרב. הרגת ביום אפיך, טבחת לא חמלת. תכרך ליום מועד מגורי מסביב, ולא היה ביום אף אדוני פליט ושריד. אשר טיפחתי וריביתי אויבי חינם.
Chapter 3. אני הגבר, ראוני בשבט עברתו. אותי נהג, ויולך חושך ולא אור. אך בי ישוב, יהפוך ידו כל היום. הילה בשרי ואורי, שימר עצמותיי. פנה עלי, ויקף ראש ותלאה. ומחשכים הושיבני כמתי עולם. Gadar ba'adi velo etze hichbid nachashti. Gam ki ezak ba'ashavea satan tefilati. Gadar derachai begazit netivotai iva. Dov orev huli ari bemistarim. Derachai sorer vayafashcheni samini shomem. Darach kashto vayatziveni kamatara lachetz. Tivi bechiliotai b'nei ashpato. Hayiti sechok lecholami neginatam kol hayom. Hispiani v'merorim hirvani la'ana. Vayagres bechatzat shinai hichbishani ba'efer. Vatiznach mishalom nafshi nashiti tova. Va'omar avad nitzchi v'tochalti me'adonai. Zechor onyi umerudi la'ana varosh. Zachor tizkor v'tashoach alai nafshi. Zot ashiv el libi al kain ochio. Chaste Adonai kilo tanu, kilo chalu rachamav. Chadashim labkarim, rabba emunatecha. Chalki Adonai amra nafshi, al kain ochielo. Tov Adonai lekovav, lenefesh tidrashanu. Tov v'yachil v'dumam, l'tshuvat Adonai. Tov lagever ki yisa o binurav. Yeshev badad vidom, ki natal alav. Nitain be'afar pihu, ulai yesh tikva. Nitain lemakehu lechi, yispa becherpa. Ki lo yiznach le'olam Adonai. Ki im hoga v'richam kerov chasadav. Ki lo inami libo vayageh b'nei ish. Medakei tachat raglav kol asirei aretz. Lahatot mishpat gaver neged penei elyon. La'avet adam berivo Adonai lo ra'ah. Mizeh amar vatehi Adonai lo tziva. Mipi elyon lo tetzei haraot ve'hatov. Ma yitonen adam chai gever al chata'av. Nachbesa derachenu v'nachkora v'nashuva ad Adonai. Noseh levavenu el kapayim el bashamayim. Nachnu fashanu umarinu ata lo salachta. Sakota va'afa tidrafenu haragta lo chamalta. Sakota ve'anan lach me'avor tefila. Zechi uma'as tusimenu bekeref ha'amim. Patsu aleinu pihem kol oivenu. Pachad v'fachat hayalanu hashet ve'hashaver. Al gemayim terad eni. Al shever bat ami. Eni nigra ve'lotima me'en hafugot. Ad yashkif ve'yera Adonai mishamayim. Eni olala lenafshi mikol benot iri. Sod saduni katzipor oivai chinam. Damtu vabor chayai vayadu even bi. Safumayim al roshi amarti nizarti. Parati shimcha Adonai mibor tachtiot. Koli shamata al talemos necha l'ravchati l'shavati. Karavta b'yom ekra eka amarta al tira. Ravta Adoni rive nafshi ga'alta chayai. Ra'iti Adonai avatati shofta mishpati. Ra'ita kol nikmatam kol machshevotam li. Shamata cherpatam Adonai kol machshevotam alai. Tivte kamai v'hegyonam alai kol hayom. Shivtam v'kimatam havita ani manginatam. Tashiv lahem gema'aseh yedehem. Titain lahem meginat lev ta'alatcha lahem. tirdof ba'af betashmideim mitachat shemei Adonai.
Andy? Andy? Andy, you need to unmute yourself. Andy?
Craig, do you want me to start?
Give me 1 second. I just texted him. And now we call. Andy, I don't know. You're supposed to be reading now. Unmute yourself and start reading. Okay, we're going to have to move along. I'm sorry. Okay. Andy's having a problem, so Dave, you want to do chapter 4?
Sure.
Thank you.
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Eicha yuam zahav yishne haketem hatov tishtapechna avnei kodesh birosh kol chutzot b'nei Tzion hayikarim hamsulaim ba'paz eicha nechshavu lenivlei cheres maaseh yedei yotzer gam tanim chaltu shad heiniku gureihem batamila achzar Ki kayenim bamidbar, davak l'shon yonek, el chiko batzama. Olalim sha'alu lechem, pores ein lahem. Ha'uchlim lamadanim, nashamu bachutzot. Ha'emunim alei tola, chibku ashpatot. Vayigdal avon bat ami, Mechatat Sedom, Hafucha Gemaraga, Velo Chalu Bayadayim. Zaku Nizireha Mihishelek Tzachu Mehechalav. Admu Etzem Mipninim Sapir Gizratam. Chashach Mishchor Ta'aram, Lo Nikru Bachutzot. Safad oram ala hatzmam yaveh shayach ha'etz. Tovim hayu chalalei cherev mechalalei ra'av. Shehem yazuvu medukarim mitnuvot sadai. Yedei nashim rachmaniot vishlu yaldehen. Hayu levarot lamo v'shever batami. Tila Adonai et chamato shafach aron apo. Vayatzet eish b'tzion v'tochal yesodoteha. Lo heminu malchei eretz kol yoshvei tevel. כי יבוא צר ואויב בשערי ירושלים. מחטות נביאך, עוונות כהנך, השולחים בקרבה דם צדיקים. נעו עברים בחוצות, נגוע לו באדם, ולא יוכלו ייגעו בלבושיהם. צורו טמא קראו למו, סורו אל תיגעו, כי נעצו גם נעו. אמרו והגויים לא יוסיפו לגור, פני אדוני חלקם לא יוסיף להביטם. פני כהנים לא נשאו, וזקנים לא חננו. עודנו תכלנה עינינו, אל עזרתנו הבל, בציפייתנו ציפינו, אל גוי לא יושיע. שדות צעדינו, מלאכת ברחובותינו, קרב קיצנו, מלאו ימינו, קיבה קיצנו. קלים היו רודפינו, מנשרי שמיים, אל ההרים דלקונו, במדבר ערבו לנו. רוח אפינו משיח אדוני, נלכד בשחיתותם, אשר אמרנו, בצילו נחיה לגויים. ציסי ושמחי בת אדום, יושבת בארץ עוז, גם עלייך תעבור כוס, תשכרי ותתערי. תם עוונך בת ציון, לא יוסיף להגלותך, פקד עוונך בת אדום, גילה על חטאותייך.
Unmute yourself, Harriet.
Try again.
Yes, please.
Zichor Adonai mehaya lanu, habita u'ed cherpatenu, nachalatenu nefcha lezarim, batenu lenachrim, yitomim hayinu einav, imotenu ka'almanot, memenu bechesef shatinu etzenu, Bimchir Yavo, Al Tzavarenu Nirdafnu, Yaganu Lo Hunachlan, Mitzrayim Natanu Yad, Ashur Lispo Alachem, Avotenu Chatu Einam, Anachnu Avonotehem Savam, Avadim Mashluvanu, Porek emiyadam, benafshenu navi lachmenu, mipnei cherev hamidbar. Orenu kitanur nichmaru, mipnei zalafot ra'ah. Nashim b'tzion ninu, bitulot bi'arei Yehuda. Sarim bi'adam nitlu, Pnei zikenim lo nehedaru, bachurim tichon nasau, unarim ba'etz kashal, zikenim mishar shavatu, bachurim min ginatam, shavat mesos libenu, nepach le'evel mecholei, nafla ateret roshenu, Aina lanu ki chatan, al zeh hayadav libenu, al leile chashu einu, al har Tzion sheshameim shualim hilchuvo, Ata Adonai L'olam Teshev, Kisacha L'dor Vador. Lama Lanetzach Tishkachenu, Tazvenu Liorech Yamim. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva, Kadesh Yameinu Keket. Ki imaos mastanu katsafta aleinu ad me'od. Ashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva, Kadesh Yameinu Keket.
Turn now to page 48, Elit Sion. So I don't know how this is going to work with all of us. If we try to sing together, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. Elit Sion
Alba
Yarmon Hashem
Kemo ishavet sireha v'hiv tulach aguratzak al ba'al nevureha.
Page 49, we continue with Adliat HaKadosh.
49. Kodesh Yoshev Tehillah Yisrael Karazel Kadosh 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 Tzvah Meloch Haloratz Kavodo Kablin Damim Kadol Baruch Kavodei Adonai Mikomo V'Talei Rucha V'Simei V'Chalei V'Yimshul V'Yomrim B'Richi Kara Adonai Mi'Abed Shukheinu Adonai Yimloch Le'Lam Va'ed Adonai Malchut Adonai Eloheinu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yisrael Avotenu Shomrei Zot Le'olam Li'etzel V'churacham Yichaper V'lo Yashchit V'Yirbo L'Yashiv V'po V'lo Yokol Chamato Tzikot Chat Tzedek Le'olam V'Toratacha Emet T'tein Emet L'Kneim Baruch Adonai Yom Yomam. So Adonai Tzvot Imora Mishkal Lana Elohei Yaakov Sela Adonai Tzvot Ashrei Adon Botech Bach Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yatnenu V'Yom Karenu Ruchu Eloheinu Shabranu L'Chvodo. The money Zamercha Chavod V'lo Yidom Adonai Elohei Elam Modek Baruch Hanegu Asher Yiftach Baranai V'Haya Adonai V'Tah V'Chidov Adonai De'ad Kiva Adonai Olamei V'Yiftechu V'Chal Yodei Shemecha Kilo Azavta Dorshecha Adonai Adonai Chafetz Laman Zidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.
Continue with Aleinu, page 53.
Halenu l'shabech l'adon hakol l'tet gedula liyotzei bereshit shelo asanu kugei haratzov v'los asan los amanu k'mish b'chol ha'adama shelo asan chalkenu kahem v'goralenu chachol hamonam v'anachnu korim ushtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim kakadosh baruch hu shehunot Hashem havi. V'timloch alehem hirulei lamva ed ki chamalchut shelcha hil olamei ad timloch b'chavod. Kakatu b'toratecha Adonai yimloch li'olam va'ed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melch al kol ha'aretz bayom ha'hu yiyeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad.
At this point, if we had a minyan together, we'd be able to be in solidarity with each other and say these words of the mourner's Kaddish. Recite them on page 55. Yitkadal, Yitkadash.
Shemei Rabba B'yomah Divra Chirutei V'yamlich Malchutei V'yom Echon V'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael V'agala V'zman Kariv V'yimru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabba
Mefarach L'olam U'Me'amaya.
Yitbarach,
V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnas.
Yitkadal,
V'yitaleh V'yithalal Shmei D'kudsha B'richu. Le'elam mikol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechemata. Da'amiran b'yomah v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shlam rabba min Shemaya. V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'imromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
Amen.
We wish we could be together, be reciting these words.
Amen.
Pray that we'll be able to come together soon in health and in peace.
Amen.
Let's conclude with page 58A, if you have it, Eli, the bottom of the page. And again, let's see if we join in, it won't be so terrible.
Eli.
Shalom
Le'olam.
Vishru
Shamayim
Ve'erak hashamayim Tfilat Adam Achor Ve'hayam Vishru Shel Hamayim
Adam.
Koach to all those who participated tonight in reading Eicha, Craig in leading the davening, Jeff in organizing, and Craig in organizing everything. May this day of sadness become a day of rejoicing and celebration as we go and build a better world together.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.